On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, plenty of alarm bells going off after the first week of the season, but which ones are actually signaling fire?
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, your daily NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube, and make sure to follow us on your favorite audio platforms as well so you don't miss out on anything going on in the NHL with the season in full swing. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, we're taking a look at some of the top teams in the West off to slow starts. We'll take a look at which teams should actually be concerned about what we've seen so far. We'll also take a look at some of the early surprises, and we'll try to figure out what exactly the Los Angeles Kings actually are. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, joined, as always, for your Western Conference Tuesday by JD Young of Locked On Sharks. And JD, game just went final as we were recording. The Colorado Avalanche lost again, this time 6-2 to the New York Islanders. And the Avs, as of right now, have been outscored 8-4, 6-4, and 6-2. The two most recent games of that, both at home, a place in which the Avs were 31-9-1 last year. So let's take a look at not only the Avs, but a couple of other teams off to not great starts. The Edmonton Oilers, 0-3, and they have given up 15 goals so far. And the Nashville Predators off to an 0-2 start. But which team are we most concerned about? Like if you were going to go through and rank those three from most concerned to least concerned, like the alarm's going off, you are, in case of an emergency, break the glass. Who's on top?
I think it has to be Colorado because the goaltending has been atrocious. And this team, we knew going into this team, I think they're going to get reinforcements at some point, right? And the hope was, can you just hang in there at the beginning of the season? Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, just put on the Superman costume and do enough to kind of win enough games. That way you don't fall out of it. And then when you start to get some pieces back, maybe you're active at the trade deadline like this team could be a threat. But and you and I talked about the goaltending as being a burning question for this team. And this question is now on fire because Georgiev is going full Martin Jones, and you never go full Martin Jones and constantly get pulled in games. And that's what's happening. The goaltending is holding this team back, and you wonder how long they are going to settle or deal with this before they have to do something drastic. And what is that drastic thing? Who knows? But I think they have to be the most concerned out of all three teams.
I think so, and I think that speaks to the waiver claim for Kaapo Kähkönen that was done to add him into the fold, because I'm looking through the stats for Georgiev's previous seasons to try to chart, is he a notoriously slow starter? Like, is that something where it just takes him a few starts to get going? You look at his game log for the first few games of the season. He started the game against Vegas, gave up 5. He got pulled against the Blue Jackets as well. He gave up 3 there, and then he played against the Islanders, and he gave up 5 too. Like, it is not a good start for a guy who, you know, the Avs have always won a ton of games, but you look at the peripheral numbers and they're not as strong. But then we remember that this Avs team won a cup with Darcy Kemper in that. And so it's always been, you just need good enough goaltending to just keep you in games when the offense isn't able to just go nuts. And we maybe saw a little precursor to this against the Jets last year, that first game where Georgiev just got routed in game one. I think he gave up 7 goals in that first game. But this is, this is the one thing that you don't really have like an actionable replacement for. It'd be one thing if they were coming in and they were losing games like 3-1 right off the bat, because you're like, okay, we're going to get some offense back at some point. But, you've got Justus Annunen on the roster. You've got Capo Kakinen. Are those going to be guys that are able to step in and handle the lion's share of the games if Georgiev doesn't get back on track? Like, it's 3 games, but I mean,
They're
look at
as bad as you. I mean, if you're getting pulled 2 out of 3 games, that's not a good sign. And before, when you had like an amazing team in front of you, you could get away with suspect goaltending because you didn't have to rely on it. But now that we've seen so many pieces not be, and not even just like big pieces not be available, I think that you have to say Colorado is the number one concern. So who's your next concern, Edmonton or Nashville?
It is interesting because the team that had the most turnover, you'd probably would push them lesser. But you look at what has happened for this Edmonton team so far, and it's pretty much the same story. Like Stuart Skinner right now, 0 for 2. His goals against per game is 9.64. Let me read that again. 9.64.
Seems bad.
He's given up 8 goals in 88 minutes of ice time.
That seems bad.
Yeah, and
that's a goal every 11 minutes.
You've got Calvin
Pickard.
No, it's you've got Calvin Pickard, and he has given up 6 goals himself. Your collective save percentage for the Oilers through 3 games is .794. And so it's the same thing for the Oilers. It's like you have to get and look at the teams that the Oilers have played so far.
Yeah.
You lose to Winnipeg, and I think it's pretty safe to say at this point Winnipeg is a good team. So that one, maybe you don't want to get routed 6-0, but it is still a very good Winnipeg team. But losing 5-2 to Chicago and then 4-1 to Calgary, those games were back to back too, and you just like I give them, I think, a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because of what happened last year.
Yeah.
But the thing that I saw on social media that sticks with me a little bit is having the lead in the Stanley Cup final or falling behind, and battling all the way back and not being able to seal the deal. And are we seeing the effect of just all that energy put in coming up short of your ultimate goal? Now we're seeing the documentary, the Amazon documentary, showing kind of the behind the scenes of how that all unfolded when they lost the series. Are we seeing some of that carry over into the start of the season?
It could be. I think that just for Edmonton, the offense is just not there right now. I think I was listening to 32 Thoughts. I think they mentioned Edmonton's shooting like 3% as a team right now, which is gross. I think with them, they will get the offense back on track. And once that offense gets going, I think it'll be fine. It's not great to continually dig yourself into a hole and then have to kind of dig up stupid to try to get out. But I think we saw them do it last year. Last time I checked, Connor McDavid and Draisaitl are both on this team. They will I just trust them to figure things out. And even if Stuart Skinner starts poor, like we've seen Stuart Skinner play well before, I just think they have a much bigger, I guess, degree of error here compared to like Colorado, which again, like you're waiting for reinforcements that who knows where they come. And with the goaltending, there's so many questions to the goaltending. We've seen Edmonton do it last year, and I just think that they'll be fine eventually as they kind of go through it. And maybe right now they just need to kind of work through trying to find their legs as a team after spending so much energy last year. And like if we get to American Thanksgiving and they're still having these issues, but I wouldn't be surprised if by Halloween this thing's kind of turning a corner, turning into a well-oiled machine. So
yeah, and you look at the final team that we mentioned, Nashville, on the bottom of that list. They're 0-2. They lost a close one to Dallas to start the season 4-3. If I recall correctly, they fell behind in that game early and battled back. And then on Saturday, you get blanked by Detroit 3-0. UC Saros did play in that second game, and so there were some concerns about his health going into the season. So it appears as though those have been mitigated. But, we talked about it in the offseason that it's going to take some time for this group to come together. You've got to if you're making Jell-O, you put all the ingredients together, but you still got to let it kind of sit and come together before you can eat it and enjoy it. So I think I am of a similar mindset to you that give this team time, and I think they'll go on a nice run here to put themselves where they need to be.
Yeah, I mean the sort of thing is it does stink for them that maybe he wasn't quite healthy to start the season, and he might be working his way back into game shape form. If only they had like a high end goalie that they could call up at any time to kind of if a guy like this got injured. But who among us has one of those? So, but yeah, I think I'm not. Actually, we both have high end goalies that we can call up at any time. What a world we live in, Seth. But I'm not worried about Nashville. We both kind of talked about this as being a potential, like as maybe a team that's a little bit slow out of the gate, but once they get some chemistry, they start kind of put this in together. That I'm not worried about Nashville. I think they are still going to be a good team when we get to the end and we get to the games that actually matter. I think they're going to be a huge threat for the West.
Yes, 100%. Now, you got the slow starts. You have the impressive starts, and there are two teams in the Western Conference that didn't really know what to expect, and one of them has been riding on some pretty high vibes. The other has been getting production from a guy who they've been waiting to get production for since he got to Calgary. And so we'll talk about the Utah Hockey Club and the Calgary Flames off to good starts as we continue today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So if you had the Bills, if you had the Jets in Monday Night Football last night, regardless of which team you picked, you would get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed if that was your first bet on FanDuel. So head to FanDuel.com right now to take advantage of this great deal. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey so you can get the lowdown on the players that you should be picking up on the waiver wire. Some injuries already in the start of the NHL season, so Make sure that you're scouring that waiver wire so you can stay on top of your league and win your team's trophy. JD, I saw somebody on TikTok. Their fantasy league created Super Bowl rings for like a Super Bowl ring knockoff for the champion. And I thought it looked like the coolest thing ever.
Looks like the most dusty of dust collectors that you would ever get, because like you're never wearing that. Like you wear it to the draft, and then that thing is sitting on and then if you're like if you're like my wife, you're like, what am I gonna do it? Like what am I have to look at this thing all the time? Yes.
I would just like to have one like obnoxiously big, like bigger than the actual Super Bowl rings, and be like, yeah, I got this because I won a fantasy football league one
I
year.
always like the belts, the
belt
championship
is
belt.
belt is clutch. That's what I would do. Or just do one of those college football props and just do like a fantasy football chainsaw, like for the winner. Something you can get a little use out of. Who knows? We'll see. Couple of teams that are off to really, really good starts. And let's start with and not to say that the second team we talk about isn't fun, but obviously there's a lot of new with the Utah Hockey Club this year, and could not have done any better in their inaugural game. The vibes were 2 million out of 10 in that game, and you score the first goal, and you end up beating the Blackhawks 5-2. Just so much fun, and they have furthered it to a 3-1 start as the Utah Hockey Club. And you look at this team, and Dylan Guenther is a name that jumps right off the page, leading the league in goals. He's got 5, but you got Clayton Keller with 3, Barrett Hayton with 3 as well, and Lawson Cruz has 2 himself. So getting some key multi-goal performances. But for me, it's all about just being able to do enough goalie-wise to pick up wins. Connor Ingram, his peripherals aren't great.
Yeah.
3.54 goals against average and an 874 save percentage. But he's 3-0. And Karel Vejmelka battled in the one start that he had, but came up short. So the goaltending, you would think would get tuned up a little bit more as the season progresses, but at this point, all things looking pretty good for the Utah Hockey Club.
Is it too early for us to both take a victory lap since we picked Utah to go to the playoffs? That's why we brought them up first. Because yes, no, it's like at some point, right? You have all these high end draft picks, and like at some point they have to start to do something, and it just seems to have coincided with the move to Utah. And the defense is looking good. Like this team looks like they have. I don't know if Dylan Guenther is going to continue to score at the rate he is, but I mean, the kid can shoot. Like you've seen that back to his junior days. I think this team has a lot of pieces that you really like, and I think they're going to be in a mix for a playoff spot, and especially with the way that they've started. And watching that first game against Chicago, like you could tell the fans were really in it. Like even though some of the weird seats where like you can't even see the own goal, but like they don't care. They just want, like, they're just enjoying, and that's all you need sometimes. It's just like, I think just the vibes, as you mentioned, right? Just escaping everything that was Arizona and terrible ownership, and like it just seems like it's just a black cloud has been lifted off this franchise with the move to Utah, and like that's good. More fun teams only makes hockey better. So I think they're, of the two teams we're going to talk about, I think that the most sustainability, just because I think they have a lot of pieces that you can really see continue to grow and develop. And like we're going to get a Clayton Keller streak here at some point where he's just going to go unconscious, like we've seen him do before. I think this Utah team is going to, they're going to be in it this season.
And a real key test early on that they passed with pretty flying colors, going on the road against the New York Islanders and the New York Rangers, and coming away with all 4 points in those 2 games. They did play New Jersey in the next game, and they got shut out there. But, East Coast swing against 3 teams that are expected to be in the thick of the Eastern Conference playoff push, getting 4 out of 6 points there, that's an impressive early season test for them. And they've got a pretty good one coming up here when they host Boston, Ottawa, and Colorado too. Like some early wins is going to do nothing but excite that crowd, energize that crowd, and keep them in it. And as long as they are in it by the time the trade deadline rolls around, don't be surprised now that they have an ownership group that is committed to a good product on the ice and committed to winning. Don't be surprised if they take a big swing.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. They've said it from the get-go, like they have a treasure trove of picks and prospects. Like they can basically kind of do whatever they want to do, kind of going into the trade deadline. I know it's like they have a ton of cap space heading into the trade deadline, like a bajillion picks. They have three second-round picks in the 2026 draft. Like this team, they can do whatever they want to do at this trade deadline. So yeah, I think for them right now is to kind of prove to management and ownership that this thing is real, and that way they can start being aggressive early. So one team that's been aggressive, at least in the standings right now, Calgary. Did you see this coming? Because I thought they were going to be hashtag bad this season, and they are just laughing at it. They are going to grit and grime and do whatever they have to do to win games right now, and it's making me look dumb at the moment. So,
well, and a big key to it is some of those guys that we talked about that are kind of locked in the Calgary area, needing to step up and really kind of help pull their weight. When do you think the last time Jonathan Huberdeau had 5 points in a 3-game span? I'd venture it's been a while.
Florida days, like
Probably.
He was living in a different country. Like I feel like, yeah.
But he's got 5 points to start, and in the first 3 games of the season, these players all have multiple goals. Huberdeau, Rasmus Anderson, Connor Zary, Nazem Kadri, Anthony Mantha, and Mackenzie Weegar all have multiple goals through that span. And so you're getting good production up and down the lineup. Particularly the two guys to really key in on, I think, are Huberdeau and Kadri. Like if you can get them to kind of take the lead, that's going to work out really well. But Dan Vladar, 2-0. He has a 2.96 goals against average. The save percentage he hasn't faced a ton of shots though, and so that's always going to drive down your save percentage. He's faced 50 shot attempts in 2 games. So
Justin Wolf's faced 40 shots in 1 game.
Yeah, talk about a full plate in your first game of the season. But both goalies got the wins, and through the first 3 games of the season, they've scored 16. They've given up 9. So it's definitely a pleasant start. But I think like you said, between the two, the one that feels more sustainable is definitely the UHC.
You wondered too. I mean, they came back on the Canucks, and I don't know what, like, this Canucks team is weird. Like I still think this Canucks team is going to be very, very good. That felt like the Canucks took their foot off the gas in that game. And I'm not trying to take away from what Calgary did in that game. You still have to come back when you're down. I think it was 4-1 at one point. They beat a Flyers team, which I don't know if they're going to be good or tanking. And you beat an Oilers team, as we talked about, which is, still trying to kind of shake off the cobwebs from last season. They play Chicago next. Like that's a pretty winnable game. At home, then you go to at Seattle, and that team is then I think things start to kind of get a little tougher against but Carolina, Winnipeg, Vegas, Utah. I think that stretch right there is what we'll really kind of see what this Calgary team is here. So but good vibes for the Flames. I think they will take it, especially after last season and kind of what was this summer.
Yeah, it's to quote Kevin Malone from The Office, it's just nice to win one. So you'll take that at this point. Now, Speaking of, it's just nice to win one. The Los Angeles Kings tried their best against the Ottawa Senators in one of the crazier games we've seen so far this season. And so we'll talk about the particulars there. We'll also take a look at a few other teams that just are kind of weird at this point in the season. So we'll take a look as we wrap up today's edition of Locked On NHL after this.
Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have to have the time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through HIMS, you can get personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints, Viagra, and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. No insurance is needed. One low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compound products which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
Final segment of today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making us your first listen here of the day today. Weirdest game of the year so far, JD. It's not close. The Los Angeles Kings and the Ottawa Senators combined for 15 goals. Ottawa outlasts the Kings 8-7 in overtime. And it was so bad that ESPN has not adjusted Darcy Kemper's goalie stats yet. Because I was just looking at them and was bewildered at how he could have a 1.47 goals against average considering what just happened. So
They have to buy
crazy
a new
game.
server to try to process all the stats in this game.
They had a full shutdown.
Yes.
With that one. Although Kings have played 3 games and Kemper has given up 11 goals, so it's still got to even out a little bit. But just look at all the different things that happened in this game. I mean, 2 goalies for the Senators. You have multiple goals for Kevin Fiala. He had multiple goals. LaFerriere had 2 goals for the Kings. And just I don't know how you battle like that for that long and still just continue to give up goals on the other end. And 2 very low scoring games for the Kings before this one, and then all of a sudden there just is an explosion. It's a weird start to the season for the Kings.
Yeah, and even like the Sabres games. I was watching a good chunk of that Sabres game, and they were getting outplayed badly by the Sabres. I think at one point it was 22-9 shots. That's Sharks-esque right there for the Kings. But Kopitar with a hat trick, right? They win that game. But then the other 2 games, it's they've both been we're very easily could be talking about a 3-0 Kings team because of 2 overtime games here as well. But I this team is just I don't try. There's something they don't pass the sniff test for me right now with this Kings team, and they're in some of these games here right now, and maybe they just are low scoring games are dumb. Let's just go score a bunch of goals and see what happens, and that's what happened today. But there's something about this Kings team that just doesn't really kind of pass the sniff test, and they are starting this season as massive, road trip as a crypto or Staples or whatever you want to call it is undergoing, so they don't actually have their first home game until October 24th. And maybe for them, it's like just survive this road trip. And like, if you're like close to 500 at that time, you're probably feeling pretty good about yourself. And then you're going to get a bunch of home games at some point for this thing to even out. So maybe they're just like kind of in that mode right now, but they play Toronto on Wednesday. They have Montreal, who's been like kind of up and down. Then they kind of come back home to play, or at least come back to the West Coast to play the Ducks in Vegas. Like they do need to maybe try to stack some points here. But yeah, there's just something about this team. I can't put my finger on it yet.
Speaking of, the St. Louis Blues have decided, I guess, that they are going to face deficits in every game and battle back to at least make it interesting. I mean, I watched a good portion of the first game of the year against Seattle, and that was rough. Like, the first half of that game was mostly awful for the St. Louis Blues. And then all of a sudden, it's like a switch flipped, and they looked fantastic, and they scored 3 goals very quickly, and they end up winning that game. You can attest to, I'm sure, what happened in game 2, but I remember looking at the scoreboard and seeing that the Blues were trailing, and now am perturbed to find out that they ended up winning that game in overtime.
Yeah, they ruined Macklin. No, it was it's this team again, another one of those teams that like you can't quite put your finger on, because maybe they're just that never say die team, and we kind of have one every year where like they're never out of a game because they can kind of flip on the offense at some point. But yeah, I like watching the Sharks game. Honestly, the Sharks, like, they kind of deserve to lose because they played 1 good period out of 3 in that game, and the Blues played well, and really, especially in the third period, the Sharks couldn't get any offense going, which is a common theme from last season. But yeah, like I would like to see what happens if this Blues team could actually like start the game on time for once and see what happens there. But I mean, starting the season against, on the road against the Kraken, against the Sharks, like, you have to be feeling pretty good about this if you're a Blues fan, about kind of the direction of the team, at least, because very much one of those teams going to be fighting for a wild card spot here. And I think that is if you can pull out some wins now in games maybe you didn't deserve to win, and just try to get some points for a team that just missed the playoffs last year because you couldn't beat the Sharks at all last year, like, good for you, Blues fans.
Yeah, this is going to be a fight, because I'll continue to contend that 5 teams are making the playoffs from the Central, which means that you're going to have probably 2 to 3 in the Pacific fighting it out to try to get a couple of those wild card spots as well. And so every point matters. Like, the Wild had a lead multiple times against the Seattle Kraken, handed it back to Seattle, didn't want to win it. And so they handed Seattle a point right there. It all comes back in the end. It all comes back to factor in, and you just hope at the end of the year you're not pointing to specific games saying you could have used those 2.
Could have used those 2 points. Yeah, I think though it's just nice to have hockey back, as we're kind of that first full weekend. Just nice to kind of flip on games and watch games here and there, and we got juniors in full college back. Like, it's Seth, it's nice to have hockey back. Ask me again in January when it's but right now, though, I think you have to say it's just nice to have hockey back.
It very much is. And we'll see if any of these teams that we discussed today course correct by the time we talk again next week. But we'll continue to keep an eye on the Western Conference for you here as the season gets rolling. So make sure that you subscribe to Locked On NHL wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss out on any big news all week long. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday, as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.